In the silent, starless void far from any sun, the Galactic Assembly Hall hung like a jewel. Forged by ancient minds for ancient decisions, its halls were quiet, but not calm. Today, hundreds of alien leaders sat in a vast circle, their forms as varied as the stars themselves. Some were tall and slender, others encased in natural armor. Some didn't even breathe air. For millennia, they had guided the galaxy with a steady hand. Yet, today, a cold fear slithered through their ranks. At the chamber's heart, a colossal star map glowed. One small region, nestled in a spiral arm, pulsed with a soft, blue light. Human space. They grow too fast, an elder with long, willowy limbs finally said, his voice echoing in the stillness. Too many worlds, too many ships. Their rate of adaptation is unsettling. Another leader, her eyes glowing with an inner light, added, they were born on a death world, a planet of constant struggle. Their bodies are built for pain, their minds for survival. They are still young, a third voice rasped. But young fires always burn the hottest. For decades, the Council had watched humanity. They observed as humans survived plagues that should have annihilated them. They saw cities rebuilt from ashes after disasters that would have shattered other species. They watched in silent awe as humans turned broken technology into new weapons and tools. But the most terrifying trait of all was that humans learned from failure. It was a truth etched into the very history of the galaxy. No species that learned that fast ever stayed peaceful forever. The debate raged for hours. Some argued for contact to guide the young species. Others demanded strict limits be placed upon their expansion. And in the shadows, a few whispered the forbidden word extermination. That word was rejected almost as soon as it was spoken. Destroying them would cost too much, declared the High Arbiter, his voice carrying immense weight. And it would only make them martyrs, a legend to inspire others. Silence descended once more. Then, a new idea, slow and deliberate, began to form. Contain them, the elder said slowly. Not destroy, not attack, simply limit. The room grew still. Containment, a word that meant borders, control, and isolation. It was a cage without bars, a prison of watchful eyes. One by one, the Council cast their votes. The decision was unanimous. The containment order was approved. Far away, across the galactic arm, humanity knew nothing of this. On Earth, the sun rose just as it always had. Cities stirred to life. Ships prepared for launch in orbital docks. Trade fleets charted courses between bustling colonies. Life, in all its chaotic glory, continued. Then, things started to feel wrong. A cargo ship bound for Mars simply vanished. A deep space communications relay went silent without a trace. Navigation systems, once perfectly reliable, began showing empty zones where stars should be. At first, officials blamed system errors, glitches in the data. But then, entire trade routes disappeared from the maps overnight. In the outer colonies, mining stations reported strange shadows moving through the void. Massive, silent objects that didn't respond to any signals. They didn't attack. They didn't threaten. They just watched. On Luna Station, Commander Elias Ward stared at a giant screen filled with red alerts. His jaw tightened. This is not random, he said quietly to his subordinate. This is coordinated. Across all of human space, the same cold conclusion was being reached. Something was closing in. Human diplomats sent urgent messages to the Galactic Assembly, pleading for an explanation, for dialogue. The void answered with silence. Then, the first containment station arrived. It materialized near a human colony orbiting a distant red dwarf. The station was gargantuan, larger than any ship humanity had ever conceived. Its surface was a smooth, dark obsidian, covered in alien symbols that pulsed with a soft, unnerving light. It didn't fire. It didn't speak. It simply positioned itself between the colony and the rest of the galaxy. Human sensors struggled to get a reading. Human weapons couldn't achieve a target lock. The message was delivered without a single word. You do not pass. News spread like wildfire. Fear followed close behind. Human leaders convened in emergency sessions. Military fleets were put on high alert. Scientists scrambled to analyze every scrap of data, every faint signal. Still, humanity tried peace. A diplomatic vessel, its weapons powered down, was sent toward the mysterious station. Its message was simple and clear. We are the United Human Systems. We request communication. The ship crossed an invisible line in space. In less than a second, every system aboard went dead. The ship drifted, powerless and silent. The containment station didn't destroy it. It didn't need to. The demonstration was enough. When a recovery team finally retrieved the ship, its crew was alive, but deeply shaken. Every one of them reported the same unsettling feeling. They felt watched, not as enemies, but as animals in a zoo. That feeling began to permeate all of human space. The containment zones expanded. More stations appeared, cutting off star systems one by one. Alien patrol fleets, sleek and silent, materialized at the edges of human territory. They never attacked, but they never left. The galactic economy, once open to humanity, slammed shut. Trade collapsed. Distant colonies began to run low on essential supplies. Medical shipments were delayed, blocked, and denied. The galaxy called it preventive security. Humanity called it a cage. On Earth, crowds gathered in the streets, their faces turned to the sky in protest and confusion. On colony worlds, miners and farmers put down their tools, refusing to work for a future that was being stolen from them. Across thousands of systems, one question echoed. Why? Still, no answers came. Then came the final, tragic mistake. A distress signal flared from a fringe colony. A civilian transport had suffered a catastrophic reactor failure. Hundreds of souls were aboard, their ship drifting helplessly toward a containment line. Human rescue crews didn't hesitate. They launched without waiting for permission that would never come. As the rescue ship crossed the boundary, alien patrol ships moved to intercept. In a flash of cold, indifferent light, the rescue ship was disabled. The civilians were not saved. Their distress signal went silent. For the first time in its history, humanity felt the vastness of the stars not as an ocean of opportunity, but as the walls of a prison. Across human space, something changed. The simmering fear hardened into cold anger. That anger was sharpened into a singular, unyielding resolve. Deep in hidden shipyards, engineers stopped asking for approval and started building. In secret laboratories, scientists reopened projects that had been buried for years by ethics committees. On the flagships of the fleet, military commanders quietly rewrote the rules of engagement. Humanity did not scream. Humanity did not beg. Humanity went quiet. And in the great galactic assembly hall, the ancient leaders watched the silent, blue-lit section of their map with satisfaction. They believed their cage was working. They believed the young, boisterous species had been pacified. They did not understand one simple, terrifying truth about the creatures they had locked away. Humans had never survived by accepting limits. They survived by breaking them. The war had already begun. The galaxy just didn't know it yet. Silence fell over human space. Not the peaceful, quiet kind, the dangerous, coiled kind. After the rescue ship was lost, there were no grand speeches, no public threats hurled at the stars. Human leaders didn't shout at the galaxy. They listened, they watched, and they learned. In hidden bunkers deep beneath Earth's surface, analysts replayed every single second of every known alien encounter. Scientists pored over sensor logs from the containment stations, searching for whispers in the data. Engineers took apart the disabled rescue ship, piece by piece, examining every circuit, every plate. The aliens had made one critical mistake. They assumed humans would react like every other species they had encountered. They assumed we would rush forward in a blaze of anger and grief. But humans didn't. We stepped back. We took a collective breath, and we asked a simple, chilling question. How does the cage work? And in the silence, our scientists found patterns. The containment stations weren't impenetrable fortresses. They were a web of overlapping energy fields. The alien patrol fleets, for all their power, followed predictable, efficient paths. Their weapons, devastatingly precise, relied on perfect data, clean signals, and stable space. A grim smile touched the faces of human commanders. Because if there's one thing humanity is good at, it's fighting in the mud, in the dark, without any of those things. Across civilian space yards, a new term started circulating. Commercial upgrades, cargo haulers, seemingly overnight, received engines far stronger than they needed. Mining lasers were quietly recalibrated for a different kind of cutting. Old, forgotten warships, once destined for scrapyards, were pulled from their orbital graves. They weren't rebuilt the alien way, with sleek lines and perfect systems. They were rebuilt the human way. Messy, flexible, adaptable, loaded with redundant systems and unpredictable modifications. And across the colonies, people volunteered. Farmers learned to patch a starship's hull. Programmers who once designed games now wrote code for battlefield hacking. Engineers fell asleep under their consoles, fueled by caffeine and a quiet resolve. No speeches were needed, no grand declarations of war. Every single human understood what was at stake. This wasn't about pride or revenge. This was about survival. Meanwhile, in the grand chambers of the Galactic Assembly, confidence was blooming. Human space showed no large fleet movements, no coordinated attacks, no open resistance. Containment is successful, one counselor declared, his voice echoing with smug satisfaction. They are adjusting, another added. They are learning their place, so they tightened the cage. More containment stations were deployed. Patrols grew more frequent, their patterns more restrictive. The screws were turned. Medical convoys were stopped for inspections and never seen again. Food shipments were delayed until entire colonies were forced to ration every last meal. The galaxy called it control. Humans called it slow death. On the outer colony of Heaven's Reach, the signs were impossible to ignore. Children started skipping meals to save food for their younger siblings. Hospitals ran on sputtering emergency power, their corridors dark and cold. Doctors were forced to reuse equipment meant for a single use, praying they weren't spreading new infections. A human captain named Mara Vance watched this unfold from orbit. Her ship was officially a survey vessel. Unofficially, it was something else entirely now. Every day, Mara studied the containment station looming near Heaven's Reach. She watched the patrol ships, the energy fluctuations, the communication bursts. And then she saw it. A blind spot. Tiny. Brief. But it was real. It appeared for just a few seconds every few hours when the patrol ships adjusted their formation. She sent the data package home. The reply from Earth was just 3 words. Do not engage. Yet, so humans waited. The galaxy, in its arrogance, didn't notice the subtle shifts happening beneath the surface. Human communication changed. We abandoned the wideband frequencies the aliens monitored, shifting to tight beam signals and even physical couriers. Like in the old days, analog systems began replacing vulnerable digital ones. Some ships even went so far as to rip out their advanced targeting computers, knowing alien scanners would struggle to read their primitive, noisy systems. The engineers had discovered a fascinating flaw. Alien sensors were designed to filter out background noise to get clean readings. So humans decided to become the noise. Small fleets began moving without clear patterns. Ships ran dark, their transponders off. Drives were modified to burn unevenly, leaving confusing, chaotic trails that looked like cosmic static. Then came the first test. It wasn't an attack. It was a probe. A small drone, built from mining scraps and civilian tech, drifted lazily toward a containment station. It carried no weapons. It sent no signals. It was just a piece of junk. The alien defenses saw it, classified it as debris, and ignored it. The drone reached its target coordinates, and then it exploded not outward in a blast of shrapnel, but inward, releasing a concentrated burst of data disruption. For exactly 12 seconds, the station's sensors went completely blind. That was enough. In a hidden bunker on Earth, analysts let out a quiet, victorious cheer. The cage had cracks. Days later, the galaxy made another mistake. A new containment order was issued. One colony, Greyfall, was to be placed under total lockdown. No ships in, no ships out, nothing. Greyfall was a soft target. It had no weapons factories, no major fleets. It was just homes, farms, and people. Human command reviewed the order. This time, the reply from Earth was different. Authorized local action. From Greyfall's orbital docks, 3 old, beat-up cargo ships launched. They looked harmless, slow, heavy, and obsolete. The alien patrol ships tracked them with a bored sense of duty. As the cargo ships lumbered toward the containment line, they suddenly split apart. Hidden engines ignited with a furious blue glare. Hull panels dropped away, revealing improvised weapons powering up. The alien patrol reacted instantly, their weapons locking on, but they were too late. The human ships didn't target the patrol. They targeted the containment station's power support array. Explosions rippled across the station's surface. Not enough to destroy it, but more than enough to cripple it. The lights on the massive structure flickered and went dark. For the first time since the containment began, a zone had failed. The human ships didn't stay to celebrate. They vanished back into the chaos of deep space, their modified drives leaving nothing but static behind. The galaxy was stunned. Emergency meetings were called. Analysts argued. Commanders demanded immediate retaliation. But the council hesitated. It could have been an accident, one voice suggested, clinging to the idea of their own superiority. It was not, another said, his voice grim. It was a message. They decided to respond carefully. A small task force was sent to investigate the damaged station. When they arrived, they found something deeply unsettling. The station was empty. Not destroyed, emptied. Human teams had boarded it in the dark, stripped it of any valuable technology, and left. They left behind a single mark, burned into the central hull. A simple human symbol. A line, broken in the middle. Across human space, the meaning was instantly understood. The cage could be broken. There were no open celebrations, no victory parades. Human fleets simply received new orders and adjusted their plans. The first strike had worked. The second would be louder. And somewhere, deep within the secure command centers of the alien powers, ancient commanders began to feel an emotion they hadn't experienced in centuries: uncertainty. Because the species they thought they had trapped was not resisting like cornered prey. It was learning like a patient predator. And humanity was done being quiet. The Galactic Assembly could no longer pretend. For centuries, the vast expanse of human space was a problem to be managed, a territory to be contained. But the pretense of control was shattering. Containment stations, once symbols of unyielding power, reported damage from phantom strikes. Patrol fleets, the proud enforcers of galactic law, sent frantic last transmissions before vanishing into the void. Human space was no longer silent. It was active, buzzing with the chaotic energy that the ancient races of the galaxy couldn't comprehend. In war chambers built long before humanity had even discovered fire, the most ancient and revered commanders convened. The air was thick with tension, the holographic displays showing disturbing patterns of human activity. Admiral Zethra, her voice as sharp and cold as the vacuum between stars, broke the silence. "This is no longer passive resistance," she declared, her multifaceted eyes scanning the grim faces around the table. "The humans are probing. They are learning. They are adapting." Another commander, a veteran of 1,000-year peace, scoffed. "They are still weak, a chaotic, disorganized species driven by emotion. We must simply remind them of their place, as we have done before." A murmur of agreement rippled through the chamber. The decision was swift and unanimous. A containment enforcement fleet would be dispatched into human space. This wasn't to be a full-scale invasion that would be beneath them. It was to be a demonstration. Just enough overwhelming force to crush any burgeoning resistance and restore the comfortable, predictable order they had always known. The fleet was a masterpiece of military engineering. Sleek, obsidian warships moved in perfect, synchronized formations, their hulls lined with ancient weapons that could crack planets. Their communication was instantaneous, their discipline absolute. They were the embodiment of perfection, and in their minds, perfection was the ultimate guarantee of victory. Their target was a dead star system on the outer edge of human territory, a place known on human star charts as Black Halo. No colonies, no stations, nothing of any conceivable value, or so the galactic records claimed. Long before the alien fleet sliced through the fabric of spacetime, human long-range sensors, hidden in the cosmic dust of forgotten nebulae, had detected their approach. Deep beneath the surface of Earth, in a shielded command hub buzzing with quiet efficiency, human commanders watched the alien vectors on massive screens. There were no grand speeches, no theatrical declarations. There was only a quiet resolve, a shared understanding. Orders were dispatched through a web of encrypted channels, and across the sector, human ships began to move. They did not gather as a single, glorious fleet. They moved like ghosts, as fragments of a shattered mirror. Old, decommissioned destroyers, their hulls patched and repainted. Hulking cargo ships, their cavernous holds secretly retrofitted with weapon systems. Nimble survey vessels and blisteringly fast courier ships. One by one, they slipped into position around the Black Halo system. Engines running cold, weapons staying dark, bleeding heat into the surrounding void to become nearly invisible. They waited. The alien fleet entered the system in their immaculate, tight formation, a spear of black metal aimed at the heart of an empty system. Their powerful scanners swept the void, searching for the telltale signs of human ships, stations, or defenses. They found nothing. The silence was absolute. "This system is empty," an officer reported to the flagship, his voice tinged with the slightest hint of boredom. Proceeding inward, as ordered, and that was when space itself changed. At uneven, unpredictable intervals, human ships ignited their drives. Some burst forward with reckless abandon, others drifted lazily as if caught in an unseen current. A tidal wave of signals flooded the system, false sensor readings, ghost ships that flickered in and out of existence, echoes of fleets that weren't there. The aliens' perfectly calibrated sensors, designed to track orderly fleets, were overwhelmed. Targets appeared for a microsecond, only to vanish. Formations that were solid one moment became phantoms the next. Then, the first human ship fired, but it didn't target a warship. It targeted space itself. A modified mining charge, a simple, brutal piece of human ingenuity, detonated near the alien formation. The explosion didn't just release energy. It tore a hole in the local gravity field. The finely tuned alien ships, designed to operate in stable conditions, were thrown into disarray. Their perfect formations broke as guidance systems fought against a physics they didn't anticipate. In that moment of chaos, the human ships surged forward. They didn't follow established naval doctrine. They didn't attack the largest ships first, the command vessels, the carriers. They went for the eyes. Laser cutter rays from repurposed salvage ships shredded the delicate sensor dishes on the alien warships. Communication relays, the pride of the alien fleet, were jammed with a cacophony of human noise, everything from ancient rock music to nonsensical data packets. The command ships suddenly found themselves blind, deaf, and utterly alone in a sea of confusion. Alien commanders, their composure finally cracking, tried to regroup, to re-establish the order they so desperately craved, but the humans wouldn't allow it. They moved with a suicidal, unpredictable grace. They danced too close for the aliens' powerful long-range weapons to track, and stayed too far for their close-quarters defense systems to be effective. They attacked from above, below, and behind vectors that alien doctrine, written over millennia of fighting other conventional fleets, had deemed inefficient and illogical. Human pilots flew like they were falling, not flying. There was a terrifying artistry to their madness. Ships collided on purpose, turning themselves into kinetic weapons. Explosions were not just damage, they were used as cover, a screen of plasma and shrapnel to mask the next attack. Debris fields became navigational hazards and impromptu weapons. On the alien bridges, captains shouted orders that were instantly obsolete. The battle space changed faster than they could process. One pristine alien cruiser, its captain determined to make a stand, attempted to charge its main weapon, a lance of energy that could obliterate a small moon. As the weapon core whined towards full power, a small human courier ship, little more than an engine with a cockpit, slammed into its side at full, unimaginable speed. Both ships vanished in a silent, brilliant flash of fire, a final, defiant act of asymmetrical warfare. The alien fleet, what was left of it, reeled. On the flagship, Admiral Zethra watched the chaos unfold on her main view screen, her voice a low hiss of disbelief. "This is chaos," she seethed. "Regain formation. Impose order." But formation no longer mattered. Order was a luxury they no longer had. As if the physical assault wasn't enough, a second, invisible attack was underway. Human hackers, a loose collective of digital anarchists and military specialists, breached the alien systems. They used a bizarre, hybrid code fragments of stolen alien encryption mixed with the sheer, unpredictable randomness of human creativity. On alien bridges, control panels flickered and died. Targeting systems, once a symbol of their unerring precision, suddenly locked onto friendly ships. Autopilot systems veered wildly off course. The alien crews, trained for perfection, had never once drilled for catastrophic system failure in the middle of a battle. Humans, on the other hand, had built entire careers on fixing things that were broken. Then came the final insult. Human Marines, launched from unassuming cargo ships, boarded the damaged and drifting alien vessels. They fought in the narrow, unfamiliar corridors with simple, brutal weapons. No elegant energy blades, no personal shields, just kinetic rifles, combat shotguns, and the sheer force of will. They were faster, more aggressive, and moved with a ferocity that bordered on primal. On one crippled cruiser, a wounded alien officer, his uniform torn and bloodied, found himself cornered by a human soldier. The soldier's face was hidden behind a dark visor, their armor scarred and dented. The alien stared, struggling to comprehend the scene of his perfect world collapsing around him. "You should not win," the officer croaked, a statement of fact, not a question. "This is not how war is fought." The human soldier paused, their rifle held steady. A calm, synthetic voice came from their helmet speaker. "We don't need to win," the voice said, devoid of triumph or malice. "We just need you to lose." The battle for Black Halo lasted less than 12 minutes. When the last echoes of weapon fire faded, the system was a graveyard, a testament to a clash of philosophies. Wreckage, both human and alien, drifted in a slow, silent ballet of destruction. More than half of the vaunted containment enforcement fleet was gone, destroyed, disabled, or captured. The rest, broken and terrified, had already fled back into the supposed safety of their own space, carrying with them a message more terrifying than any military report. Humanity was not contained. Human losses were heavy. Many brave pilots and soldiers would not be returning home. But in the cold calculus of this new war, the losses were deemed acceptable. A message had been sent. A line had been drawn. The silence of human space was over. Now, the galaxy would have to listen. For the first time in recorded history, the galaxy froze. The news spread like a shockwave, rippling through the hyperspace relays, carried on desperate emergency signals that flooded the Galactic Assembly. A containment, enforcement fleet had been defeated, and it had been defeated by humans. Panic erupted in the hallowed halls of the Assembly. Voices rose, a cacophony of fear and fury. Some demanded immediate, overwhelming escalation. They called for the full might of the United Species to be brought down upon the insolent humans, to crush this rebellion before it could inspire others. Others, their voices trembling, pleaded for caution, for negotiations. They argued that any species capable of such a feat was too dangerous to provoke further. But beneath the frantic political maneuvering, a deeper, more primal fear began to take root. It wasn't the strength of humanity's weapons or the resilience of their ships that terrified the ancient empires. It was their mindset. The battle hadn't been a desperate defense of territory. It wasn't a fight for resources or strategic advantage. No, the humans had fought for something far more abstract and infinitely more dangerous. They fought to prove a point. They fought to show the galaxy that containment was not control, that the limits imposed upon them were merely suggestions, waiting to be broken. And what they did after their victory was, in many ways, worse than the battle itself. The human fleets didn't pursue the shattered, retreating alien forces. They didn't seize new territory, or issue demands. Instead, they simply broadcast the battle footage, all of it, not an edited, polished propaganda piece, not a highlight reel of their triumphs. They sent the raw, brutal, unvarnished truth across every open channel in the galaxy. And the galaxy watched, on countless worlds, under alien suns. Species gathered around their screens in stunned silence. They saw human ships move with the coordinated chaos of a storm front, a whirlwind of metal and fire. They watched in disbelief as human commanders sacrificed entire vessels, without a moment's hesitation, turning their own dying ships into weapons to create an opening for another. They saw the disciplined, technologically superior fleets of the enforcers break, then scatter, then crumble into dust and debris under the relentless, almost suicidal, human assault. The effect was instantaneous and profound for the young, fledgling civilizations, those chafing under the thumb of the elder races. The footage was a spark of hope. It was proof that the galactic order was not immutable, that the powerful were not invincible. But for the old empires, the architects of the containment policy, the footage was a harbinger of dread. It was a vision of their own potential demise. Back in the Galactic Assembly Hall, the shouting had subsided. A heavy, suffocating silence descended, far more unnerving than the earlier chaos. An elder ambassador from a species that had seen the rise and fall of 1,000 empires whispered, his voice barely audible. "They fight like extinction," is a familiar acquaintance. Beside him, another, even older dignitary, replied, "It is. Look at their history. Their world was a crucible. Their entire civilization is built on the ashes of what came before." The debate shifted. New orders were drafted, not for containment, but for war, full scale. Galaxy-spanning war was now on the table, but as the war councils convened, a new, unforeseen problem emerged. The carefully constructed unity of the galaxy was fracturing. Some species, inspired by the human display, outright refused to commit their fleets. They would not fight a species that valued freedom so fiercely. Others went further, secretly funneling supplies, resources, and intelligence to the isolated human systems. A few, bolder still, openly withdrew from all containment operations, declaring their neutrality and forcing the Assembly's hand. The galaxy was splitting apart at the seams, and for the first time, humanity was no longer the species on trial. The old empires were now the ones being judged, and many were being found wanting. Miles away, on the bridge of the human flagship, Commander Elias Ward watched the final intelligence report scroll across his screen. He saw the political fractures, the secret aid, the growing legend of humanity stand. But he didn't smile. There was no triumph in his eyes, only a weary resolve. "This was only the beginning," he said, his voice a low murmur in the quiet command center. "They'll learn from this. They will come back stronger, more ruthless." A young officer, barely out of the academy and still buzzing with the adrenaline of their impossible victory, turned to him. "Sir, did we win?" Ward looked away from the star charts and met the young man's gaze. He slowly shook his head. "No," he said, the word landing with quiet finality. "We didn't win. We just introduced ourselves." And far across the cold expanse of space, in gleaming shipyards and fortified command centers, alien admirals did just as Ward predicted. They rebuilt their fleets, they sharpened their weapons, They studied the raw footage of their defeat, analyzing every human maneuver, every sacrifice. They told their crews, their leaders, and themselves that the first battle was an anomaly, a fluke, a miscalculation based on flawed intelligence. But in the dead of their starless nights, when they were alone with their thoughts, they knew the truth. They had tried to cage a hurricane. They had tried to chain a species that didn't just survive struggle, but evolved through it, thrived on it. They had pushed too far. And now, that species was about to teach the rest of the galaxy a very old, very human lesson. The lesson of what happens when you corner something that has nothing left to lose. The battle at Black Halo didn't echo with sound. It echoed with consequences. Across the galaxy, governments stopped pretending the conflict was small. News spread through official channels and secret ones. Every species, from every corner of the cosmos, saw the same truth, just from different angles. Humanity had broken containment, and they had survived. In the hallowed Galactic Assembly Hall, emergency lights pulsed red where ancient, calming symbols once shone. Leaders spoke over one another, their voices sharp with a fear that had been absent for millennia. They ambushed an enforcement fleet. One counselor hissed, his words dripping with outrage. "That is a declared act of war." Another voice, calmer but no less firm, retorted, "They were contained without their consent." This outcome was not just predictable, it was inevitable. The ancient species, the architects of the current galactic order, argued amongst themselves. Some, rigid in their power, demanded humanity's complete and utter annihilation. Others, sensing a dangerous shift in the cosmic winds, urged caution. A new, unsettling fear taking root in their minds. What if the humans were right? Outside the Grand Hall, the younger species watched in silence. They had long memories. They remembered old treaties, broken by the very ancient powers now debating humanity's fate. They remembered how the word containment had, in the past, been a slow, creeping synonym for extinction. And now, they saw humanity fighting back against that same fate, and winning. And so, secret meetings began. In quiet, forgotten systems far from the Council's watchful eyes, alien diplomats met human envoys in the shadowed docking bays of neutral stations. They spoke carefully, choosing their words with the precision of surgeons. They shared information even more carefully, testing the waters, building fragile bridges of trust. Human commanders listened. They didn't demand loyalty or fealty. They offered something far more revolutionary: honesty. "We do not want your worlds," one human envoy stated, their voice steady. "We want our freedom." That simple, powerful message began its long journey, traveling from star to star. Meanwhile, the Galactic Military Command was in upheaval. New fleets were commissioned, their metallic hulls gleaming under the light of artificial suns. Old, forgotten weapons were awakened from their long slumber. Entire shipyards, once dedicated to commerce and exploration, shifted to relentless war production. But something was wrong. Something was deeply unsettling. Human fleets were no longer where they were expected to be. They weren't defending borders in a predictable, static line. Instead, they attacked ideas. Supply routes that had been safe for centuries vanished into nothing. Critical communication hubs went dark without a trace. Patrol ships, the eyes and ears of the fleet, simply disappeared, never even sending a distress call. Humanity's strategy confused and frustrated the galaxy's greatest military minds. They didn't strike at capitals or fortified worlds. They cut the lifelines, the arteries of the galactic order, causing a slow, creeping paralysis. At the same time, human broadcasts changed their tone. There were no threats, no boasts of victory. There were just facts. Human channels, open for anyone to see, showed footage of medical ships, clearly marked with universal symbols of aid, being blocked by Council fleets. They showed colonies on the brink of starvation, their supply lines cut. They showed rescue crews, trying to save lives after natural disasters, disabled and turned away. They didn't beg for help. They presented the evidence and let the galaxy draw its own conclusions. Across the neutral systems, public opinion began to shift, slowly at first, then like a tidal wave. Protests erupted on worlds that had been peaceful for eons. Planetary governments began demanding answers from the Council, their voices joining a growing chorus of dissent. The word containment became poison, a term of shame and oppression. Alien commanders, pressured from all sides, pushed harder. They launched massive, coordinated strikes against suspected human shipyards and bases. Some of these attacks succeeded. Human casualties mounted, and the cost of their freedom was written in fire and loss. But the humans did not slow down. They adapted. A damaged shipyard would become a deadly trap. A fake factory would lure an enemy fleet into a devastating ambush. Human engineers, displaying a terrifying ingenuity, turned the wreckage of their own ships into new and deadlier weapons. On the world of Ars Prime, an ancient alien battle fleet arrived, expecting to find a terrified populace ready to surrender. Instead, they found silence, and then, the planet itself fired back. Massive surface cannons, hidden for years beneath the sprawling civilian cities, erupted in a coordinated volley of plasma and steel. The proud fleet lost 3 of its capital ships before it could even process what was happening, and retreat in disarray. Ars Prime was a civilian world. The message sent that day was chillingly clear. There were no safe targets anymore. Inside human space, the line between civilian and soldier had blurred into non-existence. Schools became training grounds for the next generation of brilliant engineers. Hospitals doubled as command centers, coordinating logistics and defense. There was no separation. Everyone was involved. Everyone had a purpose in the struggle for survival. The Galactic Assembly, once the unshakable pillar of the galaxy, fractured. One of the ancient species, disgusted by the conflict, withdrew entirely, retreating into self-imposed isolation. Another, seeing the writing on the wall, began secret negotiations for a separate peace with humanity. A third, in a move that shook the galaxy to its core, openly joined the human side, declaring the policy of containment a crime against galactic law. The Council's authority, built over millennia, crumbled in a matter of months, and the fear grew sharper. It was no longer a fear of defeat. It was a fear of change. The ancient powers finally realized that this war would not restore the old balance. It would shatter it and rewrite the very rules of the galaxy. Human fleets began new coordinated strikes, larger now, more confident. They no longer targeted supply lines in the shadows. They attacked the containment stations directly. This time, they didn't just disable them, they destroyed them. One by one, the cages fell, and with each station's destruction, a signal was sent across the stars. Humans were not expanding their territory. They were tearing down the walls that had imprisoned them. At a classified council meeting, the air thick with desperation, Admiral Zephyr slammed her claws into the polished obsidian table. "They do not fight for territory," she roared, her voice echoing in the silent chamber. "They fight for a principle." From the shadows, an elder counselor answered softly, his voice heavy with the weight of ages. "Those are the hardest wars to win." Human losses were staggering. Ships burned in the cold vacuum of space. Colonies suffered under orbital bombardments. The names of the dead filled memorial lists that stretched for light years. Still, they pressed on. They did not call it revenge. They called it necessity. In a broadcast that was heard across thousands of systems, on every channel and every frequency, a human civilian spoke. She was not a leader, not a soldier, not a politician. Her voice was clear and steady. "We asked for words," she said, "and we were given silence. We asked for peace, and we were given a cage. This war was never our choice." The message ended. No threats followed, and that silence, that simple statement of fact, frightened the galaxy more than any weapon could. Because it was true. Humans were not asking for permission anymore. They were forcing the galaxy to make a choice. Stand with containment and the old order, or stand with freedom and the uncertain future it represented. As the war expanded, the ancient commanders faced a truth they could no longer escape. Humanity was no longer the center of the conflict. It was the spark. The old systems of control were burning down, and from the ashes, new alliances were being forged in the fires of war. Somewhere, deep in human command space, far from the front lines, planners gathered around holographic tables, preparing for the next phase. The galaxy had chosen its sides. The lines had been drawn, and soon, there would be no neutral ground left. The galaxy had crossed a point of no return. Containment was no longer a solution discussed in hushed tones. It was an abandoned dream. Diplomacy was no longer a tool considered useful. It was a relic of a bygone era. The conflict, simmering for so long, had finally boiled over. It had grown too large, too deep, and far too emotional. In the grand halls of the Galactic Assembly, now weakened and fractured by internal strife, a new directive was approved. It wasn't announced to the public. There were no grand pronouncements or holocasts. This directive was a whisper, sent only to the highest echelons of military command. Its message was brutally simple. Human expansion must be stopped, not with sanctions, not with warnings, but with overwhelming force. Immediately, alien fleets began to move. This was different from before. There were no patrol craft or lone observation ships. These were armadas, bristling with weaponry, their shields humming with power. They came with clear orders and absolutely no intention of retreating. Humanity's sprawling network of early warning systems screamed to life. Across the vast expanse of human-controlled space, alerts flashed on countless screens. Civilian starliners were hastily rerouted, their courses diverted to safer zones. On dozens of worlds, colonies entered emergency protocols. The eerie wail of sirens echoed as populations moved into reinforced shelters deep beneath the surface. Human leadership did not try to soften the blow or hide the truth. The time for that was over. This was war, a full, total war for survival. The initial alien strikes were precise and devastating. They targeted the vital arteries of human civilization, shipyards, interstellar relay stations, and critical orbital platforms. Their strategy was clear: to cripple humanity's ability to move, to communicate, to fight back. They weren't aiming to sterilize worlds, at least not yet, but the damage was severe. In the opening salvos, several frontier outposts, beacons of human ambition, were snuffed out, their signals going silent one by one. Yet, in the central command nexus, there was no panic. Human command absorbed the initial losses with a chilling calm. Plans that had existed only as simulations were activated instantly. Human fleets didn't make the mistake of rushing to defend every single system. That would have been a fool's errand, playing right into the enemy's hands. Instead, they regrouped, pulling back to carefully chosen strategic positions. Human commanders understood something the rest of the galaxy had yet to learn. This war couldn't be won by holding territory. It could only be won by fundamentally changing the cost of fighting it. Within hours, the counter-operations began. They weren't grand fleet engagements, but 1,000 pinpricks designed to bleed a giant. Small, blazingly fast strike groups, ghosts in the void, targeted the enemy's logistical tail. They hit fuel depots, sabotaged mobile repair stations, and severed command relays, leaving massive warships isolated and blind. The great alien fleets, which had advanced with such confidence, began to slow. Then, they stalled. Ancient, decorated commanders, veterans of conflicts forgotten by lesser species, grew frustrated. Their fleets were immensely powerful, but power means nothing without supply. They were titans chained by 1,000 tiny threads. Human forces refused to fight on the enemy's terms. They didn't engage in head-on battles unless absolutely necessary. They hit, they vanished into the black, and they reappeared somewhere else, striking where they were least expected. Every attack forced the alien fleets to spread their forces thinner, to guard more space, to burn more fuel. The hunters were quickly becoming the hunted. Back in human space, an industrial miracle was taking place. Damaged shipyards weren't just repaired, they were rebuilt, relocated underground or hidden deep inside hollowed-out asteroids, shielded from orbital bombardment. Civilian factories, once producing consumer goods, shifted their production lines overnight. Hover car assembly lines were retooled to build drone fighters. Food synthesizers were recalibrated to produce military-grade rations. And in these factories and shipyards, civilians worked side by side with soldiers. They weren't conscripted or forced. They chose to be there. The fight was for their homes, their future, their very existence. This shared purpose forged a society of unbreakable resolve. Across the galaxy, neutral species watched the unfolding conflict with intense interest. Many of them had once lived under similar security measures imposed by the older powers. They recognized the pattern. They saw their own pasts reflected in humanity's present struggle. And so, the quiet support began. It started as a trickle, shipments of medical aid, caches of spare materials, anonymous drops of vital navigational data. Nothing public, nothing official that could draw the ire of the great powers. But it was enough to matter. Of course, the alien leadership noticed. They issued stern warnings to these neutral systems, reminding them of the consequences of interference. Some, intimidated, backed down, but others did not. The war began to spread, not in territory, but in influence, in ideology. It was becoming a galactic schism. The turning point came during a campaign that would later be known as the Red Spiral Conflict. An ancient and powerful alien armada moved to secure a strategically vital system, a nexus of interstellar travel. Human scouts detected the fleet's movement early, but instead of fortifying the system with defenses, they prepared the system itself. Human engineers, a mix of military and civilian experts, worked feverishly. They subtly altered local space traffic patterns, redirected fields of cosmic debris, and used gravitic emitters to destabilize the natural energy flows around the system star. They turned the environment itself into a weapon, an unpredictable, chaotic trap. When the armada arrived, Their precise formations and coordinated battle plans fell apart. Navigation systems reported phantom readings. Communication channels were flooded with stellar noise. Ships struggled to maintain position in the turbulent gravitic currents. At that exact moment of maximum confusion, the human fleet struck. The battle was short, brutally intense, and decisive. The human ships, familiar with the chaos they had created, moved like wraiths through the storm, their weapons finding their marks with deadly accuracy. The vaunted armada, battered and disoriented, was forced to withdraw, leaving a trail of wreckage behind. For the very first time, in their shielded council chambers, the ancient commanders were forced to admit a hard truth. This war was draining them. It was costing them far more in ships, resources, and morale than they had ever anticipated. But human command did not celebrate. There were no victory parades. They simply updated their projections, analyzed the data, and planned their next move. They knew the war was far from over. Losses were mounting on all sides. The lists of names on human memorials grew longer with each passing cycle. Across the galaxy, the strain began to show. Alien societies, long accustomed to effortless dominance, started to feel the pinch as fleets failed to return and resources vanished into the black hole of the war effort. The initial confidence in a swift, total victory began to fade, replaced by a growing unease. In private councils, the old leaders finally began to ask the question they had avoided for so long. What if containment had been a mistake? Human fleets continued their advance, cautious but steady. They didn't strike at civilian population centers. They continued to focus on military pressure points, on logistical chains, on command structures. Their actions sent a clear message, louder than any broadcast. Humanity was not trying to conquer or replace the old powers. Humanity was forcing them to stop. At a high-level human command briefing, Commander Elias Ward, a key architect of their strategy, stood before the leadership council. His voice was steady, unwavering. "This war is not about domination," he said, his eyes scanning the faces in the room. "It is about making sure no one ever tries to decide our future for us again." No one disagreed. By this stage, the galaxy was beginning to understand something fundamental. Humanity wasn't reckless. Humanity was determined. And determination, once truly awakened, was a force harder to defeat than any weapon. As fleets repositioned and old alliances fractured, one truth became impossible to ignore. This war could not continue forever. The cost was too high for everyone. Either the galaxy would have to change its rules, to accept a new reality, or it would keep paying the price in blood and fire. And in the silence between battles, in the vast, cold emptiness of space, the stars themselves seemed to hold their breath, waiting for an answer. The war didn't end with a final, cataclysmic battle. There was no single moment of triumph, no grand explosion that decided the fate of the galaxy. It ended with a quiet, chilling realization that spread from one system to the next like a slowly dawning light. Across the vast expanse of space, the star maps that had defined galactic power for millennia no longer made sense. Clear borders, once etched with the authority of ancient empires, were now fragmented and chaotic. Ancient territories, held for thousands of years, had been shattered. The intricate web of supply routes, the lifeblood of interstellar civilizations, was gone, either cut off, destroyed, or rerouted through unfamiliar, dangerous space. Fleets that once projected power across the stars were scattered, broken, or simply gone, their wreckage drifting in the void. And amidst this galaxy-wide collapse, humanity was still standing. Not just standing, but advancing. Human fleets, born from a desperate defense of their home system, had pushed into regions no human vessel was ever meant to see. They had crossed the so-called containment lines and ventured into the deep core. Ancient worlds, the very hearts of the old powers, once untouchable symbols of control, now woke to find human warships hanging silently in their skies. They weren't attacking. They weren't issuing demands. They were just waiting, a silent, steel testament to a failed strategy. The Galactic Assembly, the grand council of species that had once governed the known galaxy, no longer met in its opulent, cathedral-like hall. The chamber was too vast, too empty. Too many seats were vacant, representing species that had withdrawn in fear, surrendered in exhaustion, or simply vanished from existence, casualties of a war they had started. The few remaining leaders gathered in a smaller, unadorned chamber, stripped of all ceremony and pretense. The fear that had been hidden behind diplomatic language and arrogant posturing was now plain on every face. "They cannot be defeated," one leader finally admitted, the words barely a whisper in the tense silence. "They can," another replied, his voice heavy with resignation. But the cost will end us all. And that was the truth no one had wanted to speak aloud. Humanity hadn't won through superior technology or overwhelming numbers. They had won through something far more fundamental: endurance. Sheer, stubborn, unbreakable endurance. Every time the galaxy tried to break them, humans adapted. They learned. Every loss, every tragedy, only hardened their resolve. Every attack taught them a new tactic, a new weakness in their enemies, a new strength within themselves. They were no longer just a species fighting for survival. They had become a lesson in the futility of absolute control. Humanity's central command knew this moment would come. They had planned for this endgame as meticulously as they had planned every battle. As the old powers faltered, human fleets stopped their relentless advance. They held their positions near the core systems, a silent, powerful presence. But they did not fire. Confusion rippled through the enemy ranks. Alien commanders, braced for a final, glorious, or devastating assault, found only silence. The expected attack never came. Instead, a transmission was sent. It wasn't encrypted. It wasn't directed at any single government or fleet. It was broadcast openly, on every frequency, to every system, every relay station, and every listening mind in the galaxy. The signal was simple, its message profound. A single human stood in the frame. They wore no uniform, carried no weapon, and displayed no symbols of rank or power. It was just a person, their face calm, their voice steady. "We did not seek this war," the human began, their words echoing across countless worlds. "We asked for dialogue. We were given silence. We asked for peace. We were given a cage." The screen then filled with images. Images of human medical ships, clearly marked with symbols of aid, being turned away from quarantined colonies. Images of starving settlements, cut off from all supplies. Destroyed rescue vessels, their hulls scorched. Cities on Earth and other human worlds burned to ash from orbital bombardment. Then, the images changed. Human engineers, working tirelessly under enemy fire to rebuild their shattered infrastructure. Civilians, themselves refugees, helping to evacuate strangers. And soldiers, human soldiers, using their own bodies to shield children, not just human children, but alien children too, caught in the crossfire of a war they didn't understand. The voice returned, calm but firm. "We do not want your worlds. We do not want your rule. We want one thing, and one thing only." The screen held on the speaker's face, their gaze direct and unwavering. "To choose our own future." The transmission ended. There were no threats, no demands, no ultimatums, just silence. A profound, galaxy-spanning silence. Across the stars, the reaction was varied. Some species felt a deep, burning shame for their part in the containment. Others felt anger, not at humanity, but at their own leaders who had led them down this path of self-destruct. But for many, the overwhelming feeling was one of relief. Relief that the endless war might finally be over. The war had inadvertently provided an answer to a question older than the stars themselves. What happens when the drive for absolute control fails? The answer was humanity. In the days and weeks that followed, the old order crumbled. Ancient powers began to withdraw their fleets from contested territories. Containment stations, once symbols of galactic might, were abandoned, their crews simply walking away. Borders that had been sealed for generations began to reopen. One by one, official declarations of ceasefire were transmitted to human command. They accepted every single one, without celebration, without apology. Back on Earth, and on the fledgling human colonies, there were no parades, no victory songs filled the air. There was only a somber quiet. Too many names were now carved into memorial walls of black stone. Too many cities were still ruins. Too many families were broken. Humanity did not feel victorious. They felt finished. Finished with the fight. Finished with having to prove their right to simply exist. In a quiet meeting room on a neutral station, the last surviving leaders of the old galactic powers met with human representatives. The agreement they reached was simple, but it would change the galaxy forever. No containment, no forced borders. No species would ever be isolated or caged without its explicit consent again. It wasn't called a treaty, it was called a rule. The final rule. And every species knew its unspoken meaning. Never cage a species that learned to survive by breaking chains. The galaxy began to heal. Trade routes, old and new, hummed with activity once more. New alliances formed, based not on fear, but on mutual respect and cautious hope. The old empires, their power broken, began to fade into the history books. Younger civilizations rose to take their place, their futures bright. And humanity changed, too. They did not expand aggressively. They did not conquer worlds or subjugate populations. They helped rebuild, they shared knowledge, and they explored. But no one ever forgot what they were capable of. Human ships, once seen as targets, became symbols not of fear, but of a solemn warning. A warning to any who would threaten freedom, to any who would choose control over coexistence, to any who might mistake quiet strength for weakness. The message was clear. Remember the war, remember the cages, and remember what happened when humanity finally said no. In the quiet years that followed, ancient historians began rewriting the galactic records. The conflict was no longer labeled the human rebellion or the containment crisis. It was given a new, more accurate name, the containment failure. And beneath that title, a single line was added, a summary that captured the essence of the long, brutal war. Humanity was not dangerous because it sought power. Humanity was dangerous because it refused to surrender its will. The stars remained vast and mysterious. The galaxy remained a tapestry of countless different cultures and beliefs. But one truth now stood unchallenged, a permanent fixture in the galactic consciousness. You can fight humanity, you can fear humanity, but you will never, ever contain it. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more tales from across the cosmos. Let us know in the comments what you think the galaxy should do next. Until next time, stay curious.